Today we are going to be looking at Unit 1, Lesson 5, the coordinate plane. So we're going to be first starting with the distance formula. And the distance formula would be d equals the square root of x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. So we want to find the distance between points. And I'm going to be using a coordinate plane. So it says between point A, which is 5, 3. So 5 on my x-axis, 3 on my y. So there's my point A. And then point B, which is at negative 4, 6. So negative 4 on my x-axis, 6 on my y. So I want to find the distance between those 2 points. Now using the coordinate plane, I can't just count because we're not going in a vertical or horizontal direction. I do know that this is 3 and this is a distance of 9. So looking at the right triangle, from B to A vertically it's 9, and from B to A it's also a distance of 3. But I want the distance from B to A. So we're going to use the distance formula. So I have the distance equals, what helps me the most is to label things. So when I'm looking at angle A, I know that 5 is my x and y is my 3. And in B, negative 4 is my x and 6 is my y. But in this case, I need x1 and I need an x2, a y1 and a y2. So since this is my first point, I'm just going to say this is x1, y1, so for point 1. And this is x2, and that's y2 for my point 2. So when I go to fill out my distance formula, I'm going to replace my x1 with 5, subtracted by my x2, which is negative 4. Notice how I did double up on my negatives because I'm subtracting a negative, squared. I'm going to add my y1, which is 3, subtracted by my y2, which is 6, and square that. So now when I go to solve, I'm going to first do 5 minus a negative 4, which is 9, squared, plus, and then I'm going to do 3 minus 6, which is a negative 3, squared. Notice 9, yes, that's a negative 3, but it is going down. The distances, that's how these are being calculated out, is the distance between those vertically and horizontally. So the next step, if I take the distance, it's going to equal the square root. Well, I know 9 squared is 81. Negative 3 squared, so negative 3 times negative 3 means it's a positive 9. 3 times 3 is 9. A negative times a negative makes it a positive 9. So then from here, I can add 81 and 9 together. So 81 plus 9 is 90. So this distance is going to be the square root of 90, and I want it rounded to the nearest tenth. So it's going to be 9.5. That is the distance between A and B. So I want to find the distance between X and Y. So I have my X1, Y1, X2, Y2. So to find that using the distance formula, the distance equals the square root of x1, which is negative 4, subtracted by my x2, which is 0, squared, plus my y1, which is 1, minus my y2, which is a negative 9. And I'm going to square that. So first step, going to do negative 4 minus 0, so I end up with a negative 4 that I'm going to be squaring, plus 1 minus a negative 9 is 10 that I'm going to square. So negative 4 squared, which means negative 4 times negative 4, so it's going to end up being positive because negative times a negative is positive. 4 squared is 16, plus 10 squared, which is 100. So the distance is going to equal the square root of 116. And once again, we are rounding to the nearest tenth. So the square root of 116 is 10.8. So that's my distance between x and y. So for example 2, Nora walks home, and her home is at 8-4. So this is her home. And she walks home from school, which is at 2-4. So this is her school. By walking 8 blocks north. So she's at school, she walks north. So she walks 8 blocks. And then she will walk 6 blocks east. Oop, went too high. So she goes north, and then she goes east 6 blocks. That's her distance. How much shorter would she walk if she just walked directly? So right now she's going 8 blocks north plus 6 blocks east. So that means she's going a total of 14 blocks. So that's just for right now. So now let's take a look and see how long it would take her if she just went directly from school to home. So that means we're finding the distance using the distance formula. So this is going to be my x1, y1, x2, y2. So if I take that, I have the distance equals the square root of x1, which is 8, minus my x2, which is 2, squared, plus my y1, which is 4, minus my y2, which is a -4, and then I square that. So 8 minus 2 means I have 6 that I'm going to be squaring, plus 4 minus a -4 is 8 that I'll also be squaring. 6 squared is 36. 8 squared is 64. 36 plus 64 is 100. So the square root of 100 is 10. So that means when she walks from school to home, it's only 10 blocks. But the question's asking how much shorter would her walk be? Well, if she was walking 14 and now she's walking 10, that means it's 4 blocks shorter. Now we're going to look at the midpoint formula. The midpoint formula, which midpoint means we have an x and we have an y. So in order to get that, we need to take our x1 and add it to our x2, divide it by 2. And then we take our y1, add it to our y2, and divide that by 2. So I have endpoints k and l. So if I quickly just do a little sketch on a coordinate plane, k is at 5, 7. So positive 5, positive 7. So here's my k. L is at a -1, 1. So L is about right here. So that is my segment I'm dealing with, but I want to find the midpoint, so the center of it. So the center is going to be somewhere in here. So I want to find what that point is. So if I use the midpoint formula, I need x1 and x2. So this is my x1, y1, x2, y2. So using that formula, my x1 is 5, and I'm going to add it to my x2, which is a -1, and I'll divide by 2. Then I'm going to take my y1, which is 7, and add it to my y2, which is 1, and divide that by 2. So when I go to solve this out, I'm going to start with my numerator. 5 plus a -1 is 4, divided by 2. 7 plus 1 is an 8, divided by 2. So then lastly, 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So my midpoint is at 2, 4, which is about-ish how I did my little sketch. It's a +2, +4, so it's in the right quadrant. So now let's look at segment CD, and let's find the midpoint for that one. So again, I'm going to just do a quick little sketch just so I can kind of see where it's going to go. C is at a -8, 0, so it's over here. D is at a +3, +7. So this is my line segment, and I want to find the midpoint of that again. So midpoint would be somewhere in here. So hopefully we end up with something with a -x value and a positive y value. So using that, I'm going to use my midpoint formula. So my x1, sorry, let's label those. So my x1, y1, x2, y2. So my x1 is negative 8, adding to my x2, which is 3, and I divide it by 2. Then I take my y1, which is 0, add it to my y2, which is 7, divided by 2. Well, negative 8 plus 3 is a negative 5, divided by 2. 0 plus 7 is 7, divided by 2. Negative 5 divided by 2 is not a whole number, so you can leave it like this, but if you also choose to go in decimal form, I'm okay with that as well. So this would be a negative 2.5. 7 divided by 2 is also not a whole number, so you can leave it like this. So I will accept this as an answer, as your midpoint, or your decimals, whichever you're more comfortable with. So 7 halves would be 3.5. So either of these would be acceptable for your midpoint, which is what we were talking about. We have a negative x value and a positive y value. So we want to find an endpoint. So we're going to be working a little bit different now. The midpoint of ST. So we already know what the midpoint is. We don't need to find it. So if I do a quick sketch just to show this, sometimes will help. I highly suggest you do this. We have point M is at 4, 6. So positive 4, positive 6. So here's my M. One of the endpoints S is at negative 1, 2. So if I go to negative 1, 2, right here, that's my S. So I have endpoint ST. So what this is telling me, didn't draw that too large, is when I go from S to M, that's only my midpoint. I also have to keep going until I get here, which is my T. That's my segment I'm dealing with. So I know my S and my M. I'm trying to find what my end point is. So with that being said, I know my midpoint is 4, 6, which is my X and my Y. But the midpoint formula states that if I take X1, which is here, and my Y1, I don't know my X2. So my X1 is negative 1, but I don't know my X2. I also then take my y1, which is 2, but I don't know my y2 because I don't know my endpoint, and divide that by 2. So we are going to split this up into 2 parts. I'm going to be looking at my x's together, and then my y's. So I know I have 4 should equal negative 1 plus x2 divided by 2. And I'm also going to have my y's. So I have 6 equals 2 plus y2 divided by 2. So when we go to solve this, I'm going to first multiply both sides by 2 to cancel out my division of 2. So 8 equals negative 1 plus x. So then I'm going to add 1 to both sides. X equals 9. So then for my y, I'm also going to multiply by 2 to cancel out my division of 2. So 12 equals 2 plus y, subtract 2. That means my y equals 10. So that means my endpoint that I'm missing, which is T, is at 9, 10.